Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan guru-murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. My guest this week is perhaps the most read author in the Spanish language. Isabel Allende is very famous for carrying the Olympic flag, for her writing, for her appearances on television and in magazines. She is a lifelong feminist and fighter of the patriarchy, and according to her very popular TED Talk, she still believes in the possibility of an almost perfect world. Isabel, thank you very much indeed, and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you have a new book out, Violeta, which, you tell me what it's about.
Well, it's the story of a woman who is born in 1920 when the Spanish flu pandemic reached South America and dies with the COVID pandemic. So she lives 100 years, very interesting years, the 20th century, part of which, of course, I witnessed. But it's mostly the time that my mother lived. And when my mother died, many people said, write about her. She was a very special person, but she did not have an extraordinary life. So I created a character that would be a little bit like her, but with a more interesting life. And what makes that life interesting is that she can support herself and therefore can control her life a little better than my mother did.
Is it the life you wish your mother had?
It's not a happy life, but I wished then, and I still wish, that my mother would have had more independence and develop her talents and her abilities better. She was submissive and angry. Therefore, she was angry because she was submissive.
And is that why you became a feminist from the age of 5, I think you famously said?
Yeah, I don't think we knew the word at that time. Imagine, it was the 40s in Chile, in a Catholic, conservative, patriarchal family and society. So I was just a weird kid that was very angry at the world, and especially at male authority, because I saw my mother pretty much like a victim. She was a very young woman with 3 babies, no husband, no money, completely dependent on her father and her older brother, who didn't have any cash to buy an ice cream for the kids. She had shelter and food, of course, and my grandfather paid for school. But that was it. So she always felt like a charity case.
Where did you get your sense of injustice from? Did she tell you, or did you just work it out?
I worked it out, but it's very interesting because so did my brothers. And the 3 of us have a very clear sense of how unfair the class system is in Chile. And in my case, added to that was how unfair the situation of women was.
Do you remember what happened? Is there an example you could give me of that sense of injustice?
Many. But it was a general feeling that the house was sort of divided between the part of the house that was used by the family, the part that was shown to the guests, and the back of the house where the people who worked in the house, the domestic staff, lived in cells that were indecent, really, and they were paid a pittance. They worked 16 hours a day, and they had one free Sunday twice a month, I think. That was the condition then. Of course, all that has changed. But still, the class system in Chile is very prevalent. And it's the equivalent of racism in the United States. And we were very aware of it. And I saw my mother, when I said that I saw her as like a victim, is because my mother was sick all the time. And I think not because she was particularly unhealthy, but because she was so stressed out and so unhappy. And the only way that she could sort of get attention would be by being sick. So she had awful migraines. Any minor cold would become pneumonia. Everything in my mother was like that. And I saw her suffering.
What did that mean for how you then saw your life?
I wanted to be like my grandfather. First of all, I wanted to be a male, because I saw that my brothers and my uncles and my grandfather in the house had a much better life than me, and many more opportunities than my mother had. So I wanted to be that, but of course, There was a point in puberty when I started developing breasts, which I didn't like at all. And then I realized that I could not be a man, but I could live like one if I worked hard enough.
How much do you think in your lifetime the patriarchy has been weakened?
Some. It has been weakened, but we have a lot of work to do. The final goal of the feminist movement is to replace the patriarchy, and we are far away from that. Look what's happening in the world today. All this posturing, this male posturing, testosterone, war. It's a terrible place in which conflict is solved by killing each other, by torturing, by extreme violence and destruction. That can't continue if we want to survive as humanity.
Do you think war is a male construct?
Absolutely, absolutely. Who goes to war? Who sends young men to war? Old men send young men to war to die for things that they don't even understand. And the whole world, the way that we conduct politics, economy, everything is sustained by male values of competition and power and greed. And I'm not saying that women don't have those characteristics. When they are empowered, many of them do. But if we have a critical number of women in the administration of the world, as CEOs of the world, things would change.
Do you think there have been women who did change anything in power?
Yeah. For example, we had our president in Chile, Michelle Bachelet, who did not express those values at all. Her first concern was peace, family, equality. And in Chile, you can be elected president only for 4 years. And then you have to skip one period and again maybe be re-elected once more. But there's no continuity in a program. So what we have had in Chile in the last few years is a government from the right and then the left, and then the right again, and then the left again. So nothing has continuity with that system.
The coup in Chile obviously meant you had to leave your home. Did you see yourself, or do you see yourself in retrospect as a refugee, or as somebody who was living in exile? Or how do you describe that period?
I would say that I have been a political exile and or a refugee in some ways, and an immigrant, and there's a big difference between both.
Just explain that.
Well, a refugee doesn't have a choice. A person who needs to leave because feels that his or her life is in danger just gets out with the idea of going back. So when you reach another country, which you don't choose most of the time, you just land there, first of all, you are received with hostility, and then you don't plant roots. You are always ready to go back, looking at the past, sick with nostalgia, because you've lost everything. An immigrant is someone who makes a decision of going to another place and start a new life. They look to the future, and they do plant roots if they can, and they want their children to belong in that place. So the state of mind is very different.
So you must have a lot of empathy with the people we're seeing streaming out of Ukraine at the moment.
Of course, as they do from Syria and so many other places devastated by violence, war, corruption, and poverty. We are receiving in the United States waves and waves of immigrants and asylum seekers that come from Central America, from broken governments, where they are escaping from corruption, the gangs, the narcos, and extreme violence, especially women.
I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, I'll take a slight diversion, if you like, because America's response to that stream of people, certainly nationally as a government, is quite hostile. And I wonder whether you think that is something that will ever change.
I don't think it will change easily. First of all, the United States is a country that is very divided, polarized, and there's practically no dialogue between the two extremes. Part of the problem happening in Central America that forces people to flee was caused by the United States, by the political decision of the United States during the time of the Cold War to eliminate any hint of leftist ideology or movements in Latin America. And they replaced democratic, progressive governments by military dictatorships. And this broke up the whole system. And now we are paying the consequences of broken governments.
Do you think it was ever a real threat?
I don't know, but I think that at the time, the choice was between the Soviet Union and the United States. And we were in the area of influence of the United States, who would have never allowed another Cuba in the continent. And that's why we had the coup in Chile, the dirty war in Argentina and Uruguay, the genocides in Central America, etc. But also, they were defending American interests. In Chile, the copper mines. In Central America, the fruit, the tobacco, and everything else.
Do you feel that we're going back in time to those days of the Cold War, to recreating so much of that with the current conflict which we see in Ukraine and the East-West relations?
I think that's what Putin is planning to do, to recreate the Soviet Union. But I don't think that the world will put up with that easily, because it's been a very long time in which the world is divided and handled in a different way. I think the big threat here is the influence of China.
And well, perhaps the two things together, because there is clearly now a Russian and Chinese
Absolutely. Maybe it's the end of the West, the decline of the West.
Do you think that's a real possibility?
Yeah, I do think that's a possibility, because empires end. Remember, not only the Roman Empire, the British Empire ended recently. And I think the influence of the United States in the world is diminishing dramatically. And the influence of the European Union also.
What do you think the significance then of this new axis will be on the part of the world you come from?
I have no idea. I cannot answer that. I have no idea. But we are the West also. Well,
yes. To what extent is freedom, whatever that may mean politically, is it embedded in Central and South America now? Is it secure? Or are these nations that will still be pushed around as pawns by great powers?
I think we will be pushed around, because we have weak democracies. And this is a time of change for Latin America, opening the way for a very different kind of left politics is Chile. What's happening in Chile is very interesting. We have just elected a very young president who represents the left and the center left in the country. And his agenda is a kind of social democracy, a bit in the style of Germany, and not at all like the failed ones that we have had in Venezuela, for example. And so let's see if that succeeds in any way. We are changing the constitution for this. And it might be some example to follow. But Latin America is vulnerable because, first of all, we are many different countries with many different kinds of governments, and we are still in the area of the United States.
And when you say we, what is your personal identity? What is your home?
Well, it's easy for me to say we because I'm talking about Latin America. So I'm obviously Latin American. But where is my home? I don't have a home. I've been displaced all my life. So I don't have roots except in my books and in the few people I love. But I go back to Chile, and I'm very happy for a week, and then I realize I'm a foreigner there too, as I am in the United States. I speak with an accent in the United States. I'm not the typical immigrant because I have been here for many, many years and I can support myself and I'm not scrubbing bathrooms. But I am, of course, a foreigner, will always be.
And do you feel that? Do you feel a foreigner in America?
Yes, but it's not a bad feeling. Let me tell you, I would feel worse if I belonged completely and I never questioned it. The fact that I can stand on the edge is good for me as a writer, and I would say as a citizen. I'm very critical, but at the same time I work here and I contribute with my foundation to people who live here and the most vulnerable.
Do you think you always would have been a writer, or were you created?
That's a question. Wow. I think that without the military coup, I would probably have, of course, I would have stayed in Chile. And I would be a journalist, today a retired journalist. Maybe nothing else. I would really loved it when I was a journalist. Loved it, absolutely. I had the feeling that I belonged. And that feeling I have never had it again, anywhere.
Why do you think you would be a retired journalist and not just a journalist?
Because I'm 80 years old. Of course I would be retired. They would have kicked me out of everything.
So, I mean, in terms of the aim of your writing, to what extent are you consciously giving voice to the unheard when you write a novel?
Look, I write the stories that I like to hear. I'm not trying to deliver a message. I'm not trying to give voice to anybody, but it happens that I'm more interested in people who are not sheltered by the big umbrella of the establishment. The stories I tell are the stories of people who are in the margins or are more vulnerable, of strong people who can get back on their feet after horrible trauma. Those are the stories that I'm interested in. Now, am I trying to deliver a message? No, but that's where my life is focused.
But you do deliver a message along the way, don't you?
You know, people can find between the lines what they already have as a seed inside. They connect to something that I'm telling because they think alike, or there is something in them that is asking the same question. But it's not because I am giving them any answers. I get 100 emails a day from my readers. And often they say, especially young women, say, you changed my life. You made me see this or that. And I always say, no, you already knew that. I'm just saying it. And you can read it in a piece of paper. But it was all in you. Otherwise, you would have not seen it.
How many of those 100 emails a day do you reply to?
All of them. I reply the first message from a person, always. But I cannot keep a correspondence with everybody, of course, because as soon as I reply, I get an answer back, and then I can't continue.
You must spend a lot of time doing it.
No, I'm very fast. I'm really fast. And also I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I dedicate some time to this. But that's my connection with my readers. And it's very important because I get to take the pulse of what's going on, you know. For example, during these 2 years of the pandemic, the messages I get from women who feel trapped. And many of them are schooling their children at home. They have lost their jobs. Their income has been reduced to half. And they are often living with a partner who is drinking too much, who is angry, who is isolated, who is not physically active, and gets violent. So there's a real increase in domestic violence all over the world.
And these are the great untold stories, actually, aren't they?
Of course.
Of violence against women and perhaps children as well.
Yeah, women have been the first ones to lose their jobs and will be the last ones to recover them. But I hope that in this experience they have learned about their own resilience and about their strength and will be able to fight for themselves better. The problem is isolation. Women, when they get together and they march in the streets and they protest and they do things, they are invulnerable. But when they are alone, they are very vulnerable.
Do you see the pandemic on the scale of a world war?
No, not at all. Because a world war today will have absolutely horrible consequences. It will not only destroy most of humanity, but part of the planet too. I see the virus as something that can really harm us but it's also an opportunity for change, for a different world.
I mean, that's what I meant, really, in terms of the way societies reacted to COVID and the way people changed their lives and perhaps changed the way they thought. You know, that the change that has come about in the world, I mean, perhaps has been as profound as a war.
I don't know. I don't know, but I know that there has been change that we can feel already. I mean, people are not going back to work in the same conditions that they did before. I think that the relationships between genders also might change. And the Me Too movement that was out there in the streets before the pandemic is not dead. It will come back, and it has probably grown during this time.
So how do you think the relationship between gender might change?
Well, first of all, we accept that we are not binary. There are many genders, and we accept that in ways we did not before. So the laws might be changing. In the United States, unfortunately, we're going back. With this Supreme Court, we might end up abolishing the right for abortion, for example. So there is a backlash, but there's progress. In my lifetime, I have seen the curve of evolution going up, not down. We are not going back to the Middle Ages. And but that curve is not a straight line. It's a zigzagging line. So it seems often when we look at our reality from the perspective of a year or two that we are going back, but we are not. So I think that little by little we are chipping off pieces of the patriarchy. I will not see the end of it, but probably my grandchildren might.
I mean, it's interesting you raised the question of gender. Do you think the progress in gender identification and in the trans movement is a good thing for women or a good thing for the patriarchy? Because there are feminists who argue both.
I think that the young people, the young feminists are adding to the crowd. They want as many people involved as possible. I would welcome that change and that adding more people and young men also, because though there's a generation of young men raised by feminists who are living in a very different world, who have girlfriends or boyfriends who will not put up with male chauvinism as their parents did. So that's also changing because of the new generation is pushing change. We are in the 21st century and we still have the same laws and institutions of the beginning of the 20th century. It's not working anymore.
Because J.K. Rowling has spoken of you as a great inspiration. She's a great admirer of yours. And I wondered how you've seen the way she has engaged with the whole question of transgender and the way she has been, well, not cancelled, but she has been targeted as a result.
In which way she has been targeted?
Well, I mean, she is. There are many people in the trans movement who regard her as an enemy, who would like to cancel her, who don't want to give her, who don't think she should be given any, her ideas should be given any time. It's been a very painful process, I think. Even her own, the stars of her stories in the movies have said that they don't agree with her views. It doesn't sound to me as though you've seen all of that, but if you have, I just wondered what you thought.
It will pass, and the work remains. We are witnessing a lot of people who are being canceled right now, including, for example, in Chile, they want to cancel the national poet, Pablo Neruda, because in one of his memoirs, he admitted that he had raped a woman. We are flawed individuals, and each one of us has something in our past that today would not be admitted. Times change, and we are judging the work and the people with the parameters of today for stuff that happened years ago, sometimes decades or a century ago. If we are going to start canceling people and we were going to destroy their work and their legacy, well, there will be nothing left. Who is immune to that criticism. I am certainly not. If I had to rewrite The House of the Spirits, my first novel, I would have to change and cut a lot that is politically incorrect today and was totally admitted then. I mean, nobody questioned it then.
So you think it's possible to sort of forgive, if you like, and move on without having to erase the past?
You can expose it as a criticism, but don't cancel anybody or the work that people do. We are all needed.
Have you changed your own views on these things?
I am more careful. I am more careful because I know that I live now in a time and in a place where everything is super examined. So, for example, I just finished a novel that is a very American novel. And before giving it to my agents, I'm having it translated so that my American editor can read it and tell me if this is possible to write like this at this time in the United States. Because, of course, I'm very critical of the United States, but I want to know what is politically correct and what is not. Not what is critical, but whom am I offending? I don't mind offending the Pentagon, but I don't want to offend racially, for example, or things like that, that I'm not aware of because I'm too old and I come from Chile, where we have this black, cruel humor that is absolutely politically incorrect. So I'm used to that. And I'm all the time told, you can't say that word. You can't say that. So thank God I'm not speaking in public anymore, because I would travel around with my daughter-in-law, who was my censor. She was like, you can't say that. Are you crazy?
Do you think you should be able to say that then?
Yes, I think that if we are saying it in kindness and with humor, because humor is always cruel and always politically incorrect to be funny. But I agree that when we change language, when we are careful about how we express ourselves, we change the narrative and we change people's minds eventually. When we had the military coup in Chile, the language changed in 24 hours. There were things that you couldn't say. You couldn't say comrade or compañero. You couldn't say democracy without adding an adjective. You would have to say conditioned democracy, authoritarian democracy, whatever that is, and so forth. But democracy alone was subversive. You couldn't say people, pueblo, because people was a leftist word, el pueblo, and so forth. So language was the first thing that was censored, and then everything else. So I don't know. I don't like the idea of censorship.
And yet you are giving your novel to somebody to read with a view to it being censored. If they tell you you can't say that, are you going to change your novel?
It depends, because if it's something that might offend, for example, something that might offend a race that I'm not aware of, because first of all, English is not my first language, I will change that. But if there's something that is offensive to the government, I will not change that at all.
Your TED Talk, which got millions of views, was very optimistic. You believed in a near-perfect world. Now, that was some time ago. It was a few years ago. Do you still believe that's possible?
Yes, not right now. But I think we will get there, or we will destroy ourselves. And what is an almost perfect government? This is what I see now that is part of the Chilean project. The question in Chile in this moment is, what kind of country do we want? And what will be our constitution, our Carta Magna for this project? We want a world with gender parity, a world that is sustainable with respect to nature and other species, a world that is inclusive, where everybody is part of that world and nobody is out of it, where we accept diversity. It's a world where the resources and the opportunities are distributed fairly, where healthcare and housing and education are inherent rights for everybody. That's the kind of world that is perfectly achievable. We are not asking to become superheroes. No, just that would make the world a much better place. And if they are able to do that in Chile, it will be like a miracle.
But what makes you so optimistic that it is possible, given everything you have lived through, you've experienced and you see?
Yeah. I have experienced the good and the bad. I was born during the Second World War, in the times of the Holocaust, in times of the atomic bombs, before the Declaration of Human Rights, before the wave of feminism, before the pill was invented, for God's sake. We would get pregnant, you would shake male underwear in the next room, and you would get pregnant. I mean, all that has changed. Workers' rights, children's rights, there's an awareness of domestic violence. There is a lot of stuff that wasn't there, and I have seen in my lifetime how it has become part of who we are, of the way we live. And we are shocked when it doesn't happen.
And do you think there's a big difference between nice and good? Because you once joked that nice people make good ex-spouses.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's kind of all they make.
What I meant is that they are useless in literature. People with common sense, what do you do? That's not a protagonist or a character in a novel.
You meant this only in novels, not in real life?
Well, in real life, a little bit too.
Can I just finally ask you, because the ultimately hopeful thing I think that you have done for us all is you got married again recently.
At 77.
So how's it going?
We are caught in an eternal honeymoon with the pandemic. So when I met Roger, I was living, and I'm still living, in a very small house with only one bedroom. I was with my dog. I wasn't expecting a second dog and a husband. But they landed on my lap, and somehow we have tried to organize ourselves it's like a dance in here. And it's working pretty well. You know what? He has something that is very valuable in your old age. When you are young, you want maybe romance and passion and a lot of stuff from your partner. But at an old age, you want kindness and a sense of humor. And dogs. That works. That formula always works.
Finally, Isabel, I mean, you've described what a near-perfect world would be. If you could just change the world with one stroke, how would you change it?
I would eliminate the patriarchy, replace it by something completely different that would change the way we see our civilization, actually. We have lived under the patriarchy for thousands of years, and it is not working. Let's change it.
Isabel Allende, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that. If you did, then please do give us a rating or a review so other people can find this podcast. You can watch all these interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. This episode was produced by Rachel Evans and Alice Anderson. Until next time, bye-bye.